So welcome to the next episode of Growth Ripples. It's with great pleasure that today I'm joined by Vinay, Raman, all the way from the States. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really glad to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I've been waiting for us to have this opportunity to talk together.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And with the time difference, it's been a bit challenging, but great to finally meet and connect because we've actually known each other. For those that are watching and listening, we've known each other for a little while, mainly on LinkedIn through shared connections. And I think we have a shared passion for leadership. For those of our listeners that don't know you, maybe just a quick snippet, who you are and what you're about.
Sure. I'll tell you, I think I'm like most people in the sense that there's two sides to me. There's the logic side of me, and there's sort of the what I'll call the soft skills or the woo-woo side of me. And being a person who went through school and has worked for lots of large companies, data and analytics always meant a lot. But people and relationships meant a lot too. And how do you marry those two things together? I think is probably the best way to characterize myself after all these years.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think what I love about a lot of the posts that you do on LinkedIn, you do talk about the emotion and then trying to provide some sort of lens around the data around it as well, which I think is still quite in its infancy, even though, these concepts have been around for a while. Like, it's great to see people like yourself and a lot of your colleagues doing work in this space. And before this particular podcast, we talked about what topic to do, and there was a whole raft of ones that we could pick. But one that you brought up, which I really loved, is this idea around the difference or the benefits or differences between efficient leadership and effective leadership. So maybe we can just start there. And I'd love to get your take on what do you mean by that key difference? And when you talk to clients and people about it, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so I'll start first with maybe the definition of those two words, because I think a lot of people use them somewhat interchangeably, but they really have a vast difference between the two. It's like saying left or right. They're two different directions. So doing something efficiently is like if I'm cranking a wheel, the idea is if I have to crank out, every time I crank the wheel 10 times, I get out one sausage. Well, can I do it? Can I crank the wheel 8 times and get a sausage? Can I do it 5 times? So it's less energy or less input to get the same outcome. That's what efficiency is all about. It's almost kind of like a risk mitigation strategy. That's efficient, right? Effective is all about how do I create a sausage, right? I'm not worried about how much effort I'm putting into it. I have an outcome I want to reach. It's almost the abundance mindset, as in, hey, I got to get to this new place. What is that outcome? Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess for me, when I think about efficiency, I think particularly about management. And, management is often about how do you get to do the same thing but quicker so that you can churn out, to your analogy, 6 sausages instead of 5 a day, as an example. Whereas, effectiveness might mean that you get 100 instead of that 5. So another way, and I'm keen to hear your perspective on this, what do you see as the difference between effectiveness and productivity? Because often they get also confused or used in the same sort of sentences, if you like.
Yeah. So, that's a fantastic question. I mean, I love that question. And here's the reason why is because if I were to draw a spectrum, like kind of a continuum, on one end of the spectrum is this idea of effectiveness, and the other side is this idea of efficiency. Efficiency is the how, it's the process by which you go through. Productivity is your ability to achieve an outcome in an efficient way, right? But at some point in time, you realize, hold on a second, my arm is about to fall off because I can only crank it 600 times in a day. I can't do 800.
Yeah.
I got to change something up here. Productivity is that ability to say, I need to change from efficient to effective, and I got to come up with a new paradigm. Perhaps I just sit there in my desk and I've got a little stick that I just moved my arm a little bit. Now the wheel starts turning 8 times and I have less movement. That's productivity, or you're adding some innovation to that efficiency. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly resonates. And I'm curious, in your experience, how do you see around the mindset that's necessary? Because I imagine, again, a lot of us are taught when we come into, whether it's at university or when you go into the workplace, it's like, yeah, here's the job, get it done. And then you're always looking for quicker ways to do it. But you use that word paradigm shift, which I think is critical. And I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but in your experience, it wouldn't just be around the systems and not just purely the mechanics around, the levers, etc., but it's also about the mindset that leaders and employees need to employ. So what do you see in that difference around shifting from efficiency to effectiveness?
Yeah, so this is, I tell my kids all the time that I have found that I like to believe I'm a pretty intelligent guy. I've got master's degrees, and I can't buy a cup of coffee with it though, but I've got plenty of pieces of paper I can put on a wall. And I tell my kids, what I found is that perspective is a lot more important to me than intelligence, because I could read all the books in the world, but if I can't apply it and I can't understand the context within which to apply it, what's the use? Because I know lots of people with lots of degrees who can't find their way out of a box, right?
Yeah.
So to me, this idea of shifting from here's a process that somebody else has taught me, because a process, something that you read in a book, is somebody else's effectiveness, right? They took some time to learn that, and they were able to capture it and distill it and put it into a book or into a stepwise process. Here's how you do SEO or search engine optimization, yada yada yada, right? When that person realizes, there's a unique value that I can add on that, so I can take it sort of to that next level, either for myself, for my company, for my role. That's when they're starting to move towards this effectiveness. I, as a leader, want to continue to stay in that realm of effectiveness, because that's really kind of charting the vision. This is the next outcome. This is the next outcome. And therefore I leave it to my people to say, here's how you do it, right? They come up with a process because they come up with their own levels of productivity and definition of how to achieve that outcome. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that you touch on a really important point about making sure that leaders are also getting out of the way. So, they're giving the direction, but they're giving a lot of the autonomy and the decision-making to the employees or their team members, because if they're not, I think that's where also you get a bit of complacency, you get a bit of learned helplessness. It's like, oh, well, I can't do it unless my boss, my leader gives me permission or tells me exactly how I should or shouldn't be doing it. So I imagine that's what you probably see with some of your clients. Would that be fair to say?
It is. I did a post on LinkedIn, and I was really proud of myself for this one. I don't know that I got all the airplay that I would have hoped, but I say I think of leadership as like walking forcefully in a pool. When you walk in a pool very, very fast, you start to form these eddies behind you, and every time there's floats or toys or balls or whatever, that as soon as you walk past them, they just kind of fall in behind you, because you're creating that new space, which the water and everything else. If you're moving, you feel that resistance from the front as a leader. Yeah. Everything just kind of falls in, because to me, it's not so much as getting out of the way, so much as that creating new space for others to fill in. Does that resonate?
I love that distinction. Yeah. It's less about getting out of the way, but more around, providing that channel or that opportunity for people. It certainly resonates a lot. Maybe a slight pivot or a segue. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, there's been lots of talk around, chat GPT and around, artificial intelligence and how that's going to kind of transform everything. In this realm where we're talking about effectiveness versus efficiency, what's your take on the debate going on around this space, particularly around, for people, for workers and in education?
Yeah. So I've said to a couple of others, the future of humankind is not computers. The future of humankind is mankind. Right? Throughout the course of time, humans have invented the future, not a computer. Yeah. Look, what does artificial intelligence really do? You take the last 3 years of data, the behaviors, the learned things that you've done, the processes that you've always had, those narratives, biases, and you say, hey, I'm studying those, and I'm going to study the best of those things, and I'm going to replicate those things into the future.
Yes.
That means there's no room for growth. Because you're going to replicate the last 3 years or 5 years of past. You've codified that and said that is the algorithm for the future. Yeah. There's no growth there. So, it's part of what I do in my company. We're a company that builds effectiveness tools, not efficiency tools. So that you can start to see when someone is an individual, a team, a branch, a location, whatever the construct in that organization is, you can start to see when there's starting to be a point of inflection. Oh, we found something new here. Right? Yeah. Artificial intelligence says that is it. I don't want that, because that doesn't fit the program. So artificial intelligence is fantastic if the story is exactly right. Guess what? The world changes. COVID happens, and all of a sudden all the artificial intelligence you have that says, here's the algorithms for how to do shipping properly. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're spot on there around like these algorithms depend on the data from the past. Whereas if we want to have a vision for the future, often we have to break away from the paradigms of the past in order to do that. I think the other interesting thing, on the flip side is the patterns, that we've seen throughout history. So, whether it's an economic downturn, it's because some of the people, that would be listening or in the workforce today, they haven't been around for, the global financial crisis that happened, back in 2008, 9 and 10 during that period. So there are certain patterns that happen, as an example. There's sometimes different triggers. So like whether in this case, it's like COVID, there was a Spanish flu, obviously many, many years ago. So in some ways, I suppose patterns of the past can help tell the future, but there is limitations, at least for now, around how that can be used to actually foresee and influence the future that our kids or our grandkids are going to have to grow up in and work with. I think the other element that I'd be keen to get your thoughts on is, I've been seeing a lot of institutions, educational institutions, going straight to banning these, this technology. My view on this, and I'd love to get yours, is that like really we should be looking to understand it and seeing it as a tool, because it's not, rather than a threat, like you said before, the future is about humankind and how we use these tools rather than seeing them as a threat. And I think if we just completely shut down and cancel or ban these things, which is the easy solution, it's actually doing no service to future employees or future students of the world. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I was walking through this with someone. I mean, to me, the definition of a tool is something that makes it better, faster, and or cheaper, right? That's the three things that any tool does. For example, a hammer, right? I can take a stone and try to hit some, piece of sliver of wood into something to hold it together, or I can take a hammer and a nail, and gosh, it becomes so much more efficient in my ability to do that, and effective when I first do it. But so is a book. When Gutenberg invented the movable type in the printing press, the Roman Catholic Church had a hissy fit about that. They were like, this is going to destroy mankind because this is not verbiage that is accessible to the common man.
Yes.
It was another tool that made it better, faster, and cheaper for you to understand what has been written, right? What other people are thinking. AI and machine learning is exactly the same thing. It's just another tool. So when people start saying AI and machine learning, oh my gosh, we got to ban this. Oh, come on. We've been through this story before. Ned Ludd and the Luddites didn't like any technology. John Henry in the United States. I mean, there's 10,000 stories about people say, oh, tools, you're going to ruin mankind. No, tools don't ruin mankind. It's humans.
It's so true. I was laughing, internally as you were saying a lot of that story about, the Catholic Church. I think also the Greek philosophers, they had a similar view about, when the print and press was coming, or just even being able to write. I think people that were saying at those times, oh, this is terrible because we're no longer going to be passing on the stories and history through our verbal use of language. And it's like, well, yeah, to your point, exactly. It's a tool. And in a similar way, whether it's television or the internet, parents have been always worried about are going to turn their eyes square. But I think parents were worried about books coming out and suddenly they wouldn't be, learning in the old ways. So I think the biggest hurdle to a lot of these tools and using them to the best of our abilities is actually going to be how do we shift that mindset to enable, to your point, whether it's cheaper, faster, and sorry, I forgot the third one that you talked about. Better. Yeah, thank you. And that's going to be the future. So we need to kind of work with these institutions, whether it's universities or schools, to say, look, let's not ban these things. Let's learn how to use them and give people the skills to discern when the output is good or not, or whether it's useful or not, and being able to, those critical skills around, thinking critically are going to be even more important, I would say, in the future rather than less.
Yeah, I mean, take a knife. A knife is a fantastic tool. Depending on the context, people are like, oh my God, knives are so dangerous. 500 people across the globe are killed every day. I said, but 8 billion people, most of those 8 billion people, 3 times a day get fed too because of a knife.
Yes.
Is it really all bad? Yeah, sure. Tools can be used for bad purposes, but we need to understand what is the utility of them in place in our lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm certainly enjoying this chat. So in terms of, if we come back, so, we took a bit of a detour there, talking about AI, but when we talk about, focusing more on effectiveness versus efficiency, when clients come to you and they say, look, we need your help, things aren't quite right here, what's the first thing that you do with clients to make sure that, they're not just focusing on the efficiency paradigm, but they're also looking at effectiveness?
Simon Sinek says, start with why, right? I think he's come to a lot of fame because I think there's a lot of wisdom in doing that. When somebody comes to me and starts saying, I'm having a retention problem, a recruiting problem, productivity, profitability, whatever the problem is, all value is created by and for humans. So at the end of the day, if they've got a felt sense of something that's not right, something's not fitting, they may not be able to define it and write it down on a piece of paper, but they know they can feel it.
Yeah.
So lots of times when they come to us, the first set of questions for them is, why? Paint a picture for me. What's happening? How is it occurring? When do you see it? Yeah. And as they start to articulate that, there gets to be not only more clarity, but also some resolution into what exactly it is and how do you identify it.
Yeah.
And once we can do that, then data will help you answer as many questions as you want. But you need to understand what you're looking for, right? You need to define the needle before you look in the haystack.
Absolutely. So define the problem in terms of what it is and what you're seeing. I'm curious, do you find when you work with organizations, like a lot of these things, management might have a particular view, and you talked before, at the very outset, you're big on emotion and connecting emotion and feelings to data and what's happening in organizations. How do you bring employees in on this? Because often I imagine it's a leader that's coming to you, but, there might be a different view in terms of what the people reporting into these leaders are seeing versus what the leader is seeing. How do you marry those things together?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not for everybody. There are a number of people who say, that's a bunch of, pie in the sky kind of stuff. I get it. Hey, it may not be the right time for them. Yeah. I will tell you, there will come a day when you'll have to make a decision based on a different set of factors. I mean, the people say, millennials are all experience-based. That's, I don't know how a better way to say what I'm saying, right? So lots of times we kind of go with the facts, say it's about objective and unbiased insights because humans are creatures of habit. Data tells you the habit, therefore data is a window into the human soul. Right? Mm-hmm. So when we start showing in the platform that we've built, these graphs that we build, we call them empathy graphs because you'll have 10 people in the exact same role, and each graph is like a fingerprint for the behavior of that individual. They're unique and they're different. And when they start to see how much opportunity and risk is inherent with each different profile, lots of times the leaders will drop into this going, well, why is this happening? I said, that's not something you should ask me. You need to ask your employees. And once that employee says, yeah, this is what I've been trying to tell you for 5 years, then the aha moment occurs. They go, oh, I wasn't understanding that. And once they get that empathy, they can act compassionately as leaders. And I'll tell you, profitability and productivity comes along for the ride.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, certainly preaching to the choir here. I'm curious about this idea about, I think you talked about it as the empathy fingerprint, if you like. So is that for the leader? Is that sort of like a 360 type thing where you're kind of determining how empathetic are they and how emotionally intelligent are they? Is that what you're getting at there?
Yeah, there's a couple of pieces there. The basic, most foundational piece of what we do is creating this empathy graph. Right? That empathy graph is something that we show first to the leader so they can drop out of I know into I wonder what's happening here. Into the core values of my company. Number one is connection. Second one is wonder. Right? I wonder what's actually happening here. I need to ask a question. I need to inquire. Yeah. And they usually ask, so what do I do with this? I said, why don't you slide it across the table? Just give it to the person who's working for you and ask them, what's going on? And let them walk you through it. Because now you'll start to see the world from their perspective. Yeah. And it's probably the most enlightening experience that some of those people have ever gone through. They're like, they were sitting right there, and I never even knew this about them. I said, imagine you've been doing that for 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, 6 months. Yeah. Imagine what will happen now that you start to understand them. Gosh, you'll start to see their superpowers.
Absolutely. I mean, that perspective shifting is so critical. I was working earlier this week with it's actually a university, but they've got an arm that supports aged care and what have you. So they do a lot of education. And a big piece there was around seeing each other's perspectives because there's a lot of not right or wrong, but like people having very different styles. And so that was causing some conflict and what have you. And what you're just describing around opening a window into someone else's perspective on our own behaviors and our own empathy I mean, it's really enlightening. The thing that I find quite challenging for a lot of organizations, and particularly leaders, and particularly in big companies, but not always big, it can be small as well, is the fear that can come around talking to a leader about, you know, their perhaps lack of empathy or lack of emotional intelligence. How do you help people that are struggling on that area? Because that's, I think, quite a real problem for a lot of individuals and a lot of organizations. I was curious as to your thoughts on that and your experience in that space.
Well, I think there's two parts to the answer. You're absolutely right. It's difficult when I'm in a place of anger or in a heightened emotion. It's very difficult for my children to come to talk to me, because when I am angry or I'm really distressed or stressed out about a role, I'm not open to a lot of ideas. And so when my kid's saying, "Hey, Dad, you're yelling at me. I didn't do anything," and that usually will come back with, "Dad yelling." I hope I don't do that very often. But the same way, this is that whole psychological safety, right? You're not giving that space for people to speak. So this is why we kind of start with that leadership, and I believe it's really important. And I'll talk about myself personally. When I started to realize that this idea of perfection, there's 100 different people who have the same different definitions of what perfection means, right? So therefore, there is no such thing as perfection. So as soon as I think I know, that's when the problem started. Right?
Yeah.
So it's got to start with that leadership shift in perspective. And once they say, "So what is happening here?" They've got to go ask the employee. Once you ask the employee, "Can you tell me what you're thinking?" Gosh, that relationship has just changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that, it just reminded me of a great quote. I don't know actually who said it, but this whole idea that the world doesn't need your perfection, it needs your presence. And I think that reminds me, you know, because being a dad myself, you know, often my son will say, "I'm not listening." And I'll be like, "Yeah, I am. You said X, Y, Z." And I might be able to repeat it verbatim. But his point is not about me hearing the words or not. It's actually about, do I hear and see him? And am I able to reflect on that? So it's a real eye-opener that, you know, I try to be better than that, but, you know, every now and then I slip into it. But it reminds me that I always need to stay on top of it, because we have so many things as adults that, you know, we're running away in our head. But at least as a 7-year-old, he's able to stay in the moment and question me about, like, "Why aren't you in the moment with me right now, Dad?" And so, you know, I think kids, maybe as a point to sort of finish on, I think they often provide us a great lens into our own follies and our own areas of development, because they tell it how it is. And often they're not afraid to just say it, which, you know, we don't always have in the workplaces that we might work in.
Agreed. Their words are not clouded as much by ego and experience, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on Growth Ripples, and you know, really hope to have you on a future episode, and perhaps you know, I can join you on the marvelous content that you're producing as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise. Thank you.